waves are where you find them. And it's hard to predict when waves are going to happen at any particular coast. We can figure out what seasons are best, what seasons give you the highest probability of succeeding in finding a nice wave to ride. But it doesn't always pan out. Sometimes you got to go there and wait for a while. Sometimes you show up, you get to sit there, and you just wait. And this is the tough part about competitive surfing. Competition is good. That's what sport's really cool, because it allows us to compete. It allows us to compete safely, where we get to compete with balls instead of going for someone's, we get to play with one another a little bit. And competition's good. It's good because it pushes us. And everybody, when competition happens, the energy goes a little bit up. Right? And everybody's like, okay, cool. I'm going to go out there and put my best foot forward. And I'm going to show what I got on that stage. Now, the tricky part about surfing is there's a world tour in surfing. And it's competed on nearly every continent except Antarctica. Happens every year. You travel around the world and you go to all these different places, from the Gulf, just kegging reef passes in the South Pacific, to Hawaii, to point surf in California, to Brazil, to Europe, to Japan, to South Africa. Travels all over the world. And what happens is they set up the contests or the tournaments in places where you're probably going to get waves, maybe, based on the time of year it is. And they have a big window. So whenever you show up for a 10-day waiting period. And the contest usually takes, 3 or 4 days to run. And they try to figure out which of those 3 or 4 days, of the 10 days, which 3 or 4 are going to be the ones that will give you the best waves. And sometimes it never comes. Sometimes they end up competing in, crappy surf, and sometimes it's huge and monstrous, and everybody's scared because they don't want to get broken. But it travels all around the world, and you could just get to go ride. Now, in competitive surfing, here's another good thing about sport and this is interesting because I heard this story. It was told by a guy named Kelly Slater. Does anybody follow surfing? Well, Kelly Slater is the guy who won the World Tour 11 times. He won it more times than anyone else, even close. He's probably the most successful competitive athlete ever. In an individual sport, the closest thing that you could compare it to is tennis. And in tennis, I think on the World Tour, Pete Sampras won, 7 times? 15 world championships? 15 majors, but the World Tour. Yeah, number 1 World Tour. I think it was 7. And I think Federer had it 6 times or something so far. This guy Kelly Slater's he's won every event at least once. He has I think he has 52 wins now total in World Tour contests, so 51 majors essentially. And one of the things he said was, the best thing about competition, or the good stuff from competition, is not when you win. You don't learn the best stuff when you win. He said the good stuff happens in losing. Because there's a movie, you guys should check it out. It's called A Fly in the Champagne. And it's about this guy Kelly Slater's rivalry with another guy named Andy Irons. See, Kelly Slater fell off the World Tour, or he didn't really fall off, he burned off the World Tour for a while. He got bored with it. And at that time, these young guys were coming up. And it's funny because they were all from Kauai. They were called the Wolf Pack. And this guy named Andy Irons was just a fierce competitor. And when Kelly Slater came back on the tour, they battled. And Andy won 3 in a row, with Kelly a close second. And I mean, they were at each other. And it was in the media, because, you know, there's surf media, so in all the magazines, everybody was choosing sides. They made a whole big thing about it. And like the whole surfing world was involved in it. So it got really big and kind of blown up, even blown out of proportion a bit. But because there was so much intensity involved, winning or losing became a big deal. And Kelly says, I learned the most when I was losing. That's when I learned the most about myself. That's what taught me the good stuff, is dealing with adversity, dealing with losing. And that's something that's cool about competition. It doesn't only teach us when we win. In fact, the winning, forget about that stuff. The good stuff comes in losing. So surfing's really interesting because we can't predict the weather. Even if we take the initial conditions and set them the same. See, right now we have satellites, and the satellites can say, measure ocean temperature, for instance. That's one of the things that's going to work into how the weather pattern operates in the world. And these satellites can measure 1 piece in 1,000. So that would be like 1 drop of water in every tablespoonful of the ocean. That's how sophisticated our satellites are. 1 in 1,000. It's kind of like our DNA. 1 in 1,000. The problem is, it's not accurate enough to create long-term forecasting. If we begin with the same initial conditions and run them through a model or through a program, over time they start together, but then the prediction of how they would operate in the future, it changes. Because there's still, you have that 1 drop, but there's still all those other drops that are variables in the teaspoon. So long-term forecasting is really not an option. But something that happens with surfing, and I'm going to show you this slide because I dig it. One of the things that does happen in surfing is you have to be able to see just a little bit ahead. You see what a surfer does when he goes to the beach. And again, when I talk about surfing, I'm referring really to it metaphorically. I'm referring to surfing as the study of waves. Now, everything travels in waveform. You study neurology? Guess what? That's waveform. You study sound? That's waveform. But the ocean gives us this beautiful medium where we can actually see waves happening. And they start from the sun, heating up the atmosphere. We have magnetic poles that help move weather. As the sun heats the atmosphere, we have pressure changes. It creates wind. So solar energy is transferred into wind energy. Wind blows across the surface of the water, transfers that energy into the ocean, in the swells. Those swells travel thousands of miles till they hit something. And every beach that they hit has a different shape. The bottom is shaped different. The direction it's facing is shaped different. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 swells hitting it at once. Every 15 minutes the conditions change because the tide is changing. The local wind conditions so there's all this stuff that's in flux.